This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode. Throttle to therapy. So Avid riders want to ensure that each trip is smooth, safe, and enjoyable. Basic motorcycle maintenance is imperative for a worry-free riding season. Regular service means bolts are tightened and chains are lubricated and the bike is thoroughly inspected. Ensuring parts in the working order means reduced risk of breakdowns. Well, the same philosophy of routine maintenance is equally important for our mental health. Working with a psychologist or therapist or counselor gives you an opportunity to explore your thoughts and your feelings and those patterns of behaviors. So routine maintenance can help you avoid major breakdowns and provide coping skills, techniques to get you through the seasons of life. So on this episode, we're talking about therapy. We'll address the stigmas and misconceptions of going to therapy. We're going to chat about some lived experiences, and we're going to address what therapy can do for us and how to get started if you've always wondered. This is your motivation.
Because we were so excited to have this discussion. And let me tell you, this podcast is so interesting to the both of us because rarely do Lori and I connect on a topic coming from completely opposite perspectives. And really, in this instance, it's two opposite lived experiences because we are talking about therapy, but admittedly, I have never gone to therapy in my adult life. And it's got a lot to do with the fact, I'm sure, that I have always struggled a little bit with vulnerability. And I think that when it comes to therapy, there's that notion in the mind that you have to go because you need to fix a problem with yourself or address a problem or get to the root of a problem with yourself. Why do we view ourselves or our mental states as being problematic? They're not. They are not. Even when you are in a whirlwind of your worst mindset, these are all experiences to be learned from and worked through and open the mind to new perspectives. Hence, why therapy can be so beneficial. Now, for Lori, as you've been so open during different phases in your life, you found this avenue to be not only incredibly helpful, but life-saving, which we're going to get into later. But I think for your perspective, my perspective of both having gone and having not, one of the big things that stands in both instances is the fact that there's a deep-rooted stigma when we talk about therapy. Now, when I look back at the last 5 years, 3 years, or even the last year, where mental health has finally been at the forefront of conversation, there's been a lot of really positive strides when it comes to advocacy, our ability to advocate for ourselves, our wantings of having mental health at the forefront of our workplaces, in our homes, within our family and relationships. But there still is so much work to do. There has always been this stigma about going to therapy in regards to it being a problem that you're going to solve about yourself. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest point to generate from this conversation that we're having at this moment is that therapy isn't a matter about addressing a problem with you. It is a partnership with you in your life to give yourself tools to move through, as we said in the beginning there, the seasons of life. And it's about doing the work to help ourselves really have a better understanding of where we're at and where we're trying to go.
The stigmas you talk about have been there for so long, and it's so wonderful to see those start to slowly but surely dissipate. The reality of, historically speaking, is that when there was anything that popped up, even 50 years ago, 60, 70, 100 years ago, but we're talking even just like 50 years ago, when things would pop up in mental health, depression, anxiety, a lot of times people got put into psych wards. People got put away. Women were called hysterical, if they complained too often, sort of thing, a lot of times. It always, so I understand there being a big stigma and fear based around, outright coming out saying that I have depression or I have anxiety, because we all came from different generations where you got almost punished. You got exiled in a lot of ways. You were put on some really heavy medications. There was a lot to lose if you came out sane as such. And so people learned very quickly to just act normal, just pretend everything's okay, and put it on the shelf, go away. But everyone kind of suffered behind closed doors. Everyone put that squeaky clean smile on their faces. And so even though mental health seems more at the forefront, and I think it's always been a massive issue. I think the only difference is that we're starting to discuss it as a part of our humanity that we need to address and that we need to better understand and navigate. And thus why there's so many resources out there, psychology, counselors, psychotherapists that are available, because there is obviously a need there to unpack some shit and move forward. Not, again, I love how you say there's nothing wrong with you, but there is things that happen to us that we need to take a look at and unpack. And or there just might be certain parts of yourself that show up that isn't as conducive to your life as and you're not isn't to your advantage. And that if you can have a perspective, or they can show you a different option, a different way, the quality of your life would substantially increase. Like when I went for the first time, I was 16 years old when I first went to any kind of professional health resources. I don't know if it was a psychologist or counselor, but I'm pretty sure it was a psychologist. I had a really good family. I had good friends. I had, everything on paper looked good, but I had deep, deep, deep sadness. Now, when I went to get help, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have friends that ever had gone to get help. I didn't know any adults outside of marriage counseling sort of idea. My parents went to that, and I knew a couple other people's parents that did, but it was very much this thing that you just didn't do. And it substantially helped me. And it helped me to understand that just because everything on paper looks good, it doesn't mean that the stuff that you're experiencing in your life isn't very real. And when I say in my life, my parents were going through a divorce, and there was a lot of really angry stuff happening in the home. And there was a lot of deep sadness, and a lot of my friends' parents were going through the same things. And there was a lot of, so then we're showing up so even though we love each other and we were good friends on paper, there were still very cruel things that were being done to one another. And it was able to understand where that deep sadness and disconnect from people was starting to take place. The way I was attaching to people wasn't the healthiest, because I was seeing so much discourse in all the relationships around me. Now, as a 16-year-old, you don't know what the fuck's going on. But thankfully, going to get that help, it helped me by her just asking me different questions, by her having me ask myself questions. It gave me a real opportunity to see things with a little more clarity and see where I did have more of a choice, and I did have ways in which I was able to show up in that discourse, if you will. So, when you kind of get past that stigmatization, you realize that they're really there for you, to work with you, not to come in as a stranger to fix you.
Totally. Because I think as a lot of us are taught that asking for that help, first of all, when you need it, is a weakness. I think that's changing for the youth of today, because we're finally having these conversations, but we're kind of taught that's something that makes you weak. So it's so wonderful that you were at an age where you knew that you needed to have that help and reach out for a person to talk to, and that was available for you. But even when that would have been couple, like, I don't know, over a decade ago. I can't do math. Never make me do math when I'm doing this. But a long time, like a while ago.
A decade ago. That would make me 26. Bless your soul, Chris.
Inaccurate. So like a multiple, an exponent on there. But when it comes to reaching out for that help at that time, it's exactly, you would have been in the heart of the stigma. And I think there's this misconception even now that a therapist is going to kind of just enlighten you with what is ailing your mind and then slap an old sticker on there and this is the way and off you go. I have a really close loved one to me that has avoided therapy as well. And they always would say, well, if I go, they don't know my pain. So how the fuck could they help me? They haven't lived what I'm going through. So how could they help me? And I've kindly explained to them, and I get it's hypocritical because I've not gone myself to address my own needs in my life. However, I'm like, that's not their job to do that for you. It's about finding coping techniques. It's about discovering different lenses that you've never allowed yourself to entertain. It's a new perspective. It's, as you said, sitting down, questions you maybe never asked yourself so that you can go and dive deeper into your own personal journey. And within that, the reality is it's you doing the work. They are there to guide you. They are there with the knowledge and the tools equipped to guide you along. But it's not like they're going to do the work for you. You have to be able to get really honest with yourself. And one thing that I'm preparing myself in my own journey is to be really damn uncomfortable with myself, because as you start to open those layers, sometimes there's things you don't want to look at or you haven't looked at for a really long time. And there's pain and, dare I say, a bit of suffering that you have to navigate through to get to the other side of those things. If you don't move through it, it's just going to stack up. And it's just the same of the proverbial closet of your traumas in life. If you just keep stacking it up. I live in a one big room. It is just a big loft. And trust me, if you pile all that shit in the closet, what's going to happen when you finally try and stuff that last sweater? It all comes tumbling out and swallows you up. That's what happens when we don't create these spaces to have the opportunity to address our own mental health. You would not ride a motorcycle year over year and not do your basic oil changes or lube your chain up. How do we expect ourselves to function as human beings, happy, healthy human beings, mind, body, soul, if we never do any regular maintenance to address what ails the mind? And life is fucking hard. So, like, how can you not ever look at that? It's going to catch up with you.
And you said about how it can get looked at as that weakness, right? And it can look at as to need that help, or that you can't make it better on your own, or that you can't see it for yourself. But what takes more courage than being vulnerable enough to really look at your life and say, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to be. I can't do it on my own. And then asking for help. That is courage. Brene Brown's built a career around it, literally. And she didn't believe in it to begin with until she did the science behind it and the studies, and was like, oh, it's actually, vulnerability is actually the most courageous thing, sort of. But that's again where that stigma comes, where it's like, suck it up, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't go away, and it ends up festering, and it ends up building, and it ends up seeping into all areas of your life when it doesn't need to, and it's never meant to. You think of like how much we have the internal things that happen. There's so much shame around it. We're constantly hiding it. But our external, like our body, right? If you break a limb, everyone's like, oh gosh, do you need any help? How can I da-da-da? But when you're struggling mentally, it's kind of that suck it up or get over it or whatever the stigma is around it. It's the same for getting the help. If I go get a physical trainer, well, I still have to work out. I still have to put in the work for it. It's still going to be miserable at the beginning until I, at least get in better shape. And then if I want to hit another, level of it, but chances are that that's going to speed things up by getting that trainer. And they're there to help you, not to do it for you and not to fix your body, but they're there to say, well, what needs are you trying to meet? What is your goals? And then they have the education and the experience and the know-how to then help you map that out and achieve those goals, and how to set your life up in a way that you can meet that physically. But mentally, we still just kind of run around going, well, I don't know, suck it up. That's bullshit. That makes people weak. That's we all, a bunch of whiners. Everyone's got whining about. No, it's coming to the forefront that we've been all living exceptionally unhealthy and unwell mentally for decades and decades. But everybody's understanding, the science is backing it up, saying we're not meant to live this way. And if you address it, you can not only live healthier and a better quality of life, you can live longer, because then we're not creating disease and disorder in our bodies through our mental health and all those different avenues, right? But it takes that willingness to say, I'm going to choose myself, my mental health, and my well-being over your opinion of me and society's opinions of me. And I'm also going to be willing to go into a very difficult place, that and very uncomfortable place, to do it, to achieve that for myself, and be willing. And society has come a long way, and it's working towards that, about really showing up in a supportive way for people that are willing to do so. But I tell ya, you still got to be real committed. And I just think it's wonderful. Chrissy, one question: what was your tipping point that made you make the decision that you're like, yeah, no, I want to dip my toe in this, or cannonball? I don't know which one you're doing.
Honestly, I would say it was the conversation surrounding mental health. As I said in the beginning there, I certainly have had, and everyone I think has had, some traumatic lived experiences. And I would say I've navigated through that in a way that I'm comfortable with as part of my story up to now. But in hearing what therapy had done for my peers, it really started to open my eyes to the fact that to go to therapy, I felt like I needed to have an exact reason why I needed to sit in that chair across from that individual. Like I had to have some momentous life obstacle that I was trying to work through
Right.
within this very present moment. And I called bullshit on myself, because I think there was even a little nugget of myself that knows that not to be true. And so as I was hearing about other people's lived experiences, it started to generate this insatiable curiosity about myself. I have enough awareness to know that I have, I'm sure, coping mechanisms that are so ingrained in my being up to this point, that are so well practiced, habits that are so well practiced. And so knowing that there are people that I could connect with to provide a different perspective, it, I'm sure, and I've been briefing myself, it's going to be, I look at it as a very fascinating journey, because I almost sometimes look at my own life from a one layer up, if that makes sense, like an eye above as it's unfolding. And so I'm interested to see where it takes me, but I also know that it's going to be very difficult. And that's why I've done so much research beforehand for myself. There's a lot of options in the city of Vancouver when it comes to finding a therapist that's a fit. It's understanding that the first number that you find when you Google might not necessarily be a person that you fit with. So I did a lot of research and found that it was important to read the bios of people that you're perhaps interested with connecting with. And as I was going through, then I made a short list of who resonated with me, who kind of worked in a practice that made me feel as though there might be a bit of a connection into their style. And the other thing that I was so happy to see is that so many of them offer a quick chat, about 20 minutes. And so it's basically an interview process for both of you, where it's a completely judgment-free zone. But is this going to be a good fit to get me to my goals? And I use the term goals lightly, because it goes back to, I don't have a destination I'm trying to get to through this. I think the goal is to unlock other layers within myself and perhaps understand things that I've avoided looking at, or that could be stacking up in my proverbial mental closet that I don't even know it's there. It's like that dusty old back room in an attic with boxes that are piled up that maybe I haven't looked at. And in doing so and looking at the difficult shit, my hope is that it helps me have a new level of my human experience, to be perfectly honest. There's so much to be uncovered about life and about ourselves. And I think the thing, as I'm starting to understand, looking at therapy more and more, that it can really help level up your life if you have a more profound understanding of who you are as a person.
You're talking about being really proactive, and I think it's so wonderful, because I think so often we reach for therapy or we reach for those resources when we are, just head above water. And, or our bike is just like puttering along and the engine's going, and then we call in the maintenance, versus getting it done ahead of time. So you're not having to like overhaul your engine, or, your bike's scrapped or whatever it is. And that's what a lot of ways that I did quite often is that I only reached out for that help when I was just, where I was going under, or having those suicidal ideations, or I was so overwhelmed by it all. And I just think it's so wonderful that you're being proactive about saying, maybe there's some things that's starting to build. And if you never know that if I didn't, not only to expand on who you are as a person and just take a look at things that you might be missing, to just elevate life and your experience of life and how you show up in it, but also so that if there is something that maybe is piling up in that closet, so that you can start to hang things up, discard, clean it out before it does bust open and it's so overwhelming you don't know where to begin. And so I think that's beautiful. And the other thing that you said that I love is that about you being proactive of looking at who's going to be the right fit, because that's the other component. There's a person on the other end of this profession. And even though they're showing up professionally, they are still a human that has their own vibe. And you're being very vulnerable with somebody, and you're looking at parts of your life, and it's important that you do vibe with that person. And so you get to choose, and it might not be that it's not working for you. It just might be that connection between you and the person that is your resource, or your psychologist, counselor, whatever it is, that's just not the right fit. And that just means try something different. It doesn't mean discard it completely, because I've had counselors that I didn't vibe with at all. And I've had others that were incredible. Some of the ones that I didn't vibe with, they had been doing it for, decades. One of the ones that I vibed with the most was a student. They had just gotten out of school. And the reason why I was set up with them is because when I was 21 and I was deep in depression again, I went into a mental health facility because I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any friends at college that had dealt with depression or had any kind of, I wasn't able to go to them in any capacity. My family was far away. I knew things were bad, and I just went in to get help, and they set me up with kind of the community based sponsored, if you will, because I was a college student and I couldn't afford anything. So I paid like $5, and you'd think like, what good help could you get for, the kind of government issued therapist? But he was incredible, and he was a new student, but he was so enthusiastic and he was so committed to what he was doing. And he had such amazing insight, and he asked the exact kind of questions I needed to ask of myself, that he was one of my absolute favorites. And so it's just even understanding that it's still a relationship to a certain extent, even though it doesn't get personal ever. You need to be comfortable with that person, and you're allowed to take the time to get there as well.
Definitely. And I think it's such a good reminder too, and a reminder for myself and anyone that's teetering on this journey, if you've never dabbled in therapy before, is that I imagine it's not going to be easy out of the gate. And I understand that a lot of people, whether it's not the right fit or they start asking questions and don't like answering questions they've maybe never asked of themselves before, and immediately the reaction is, no, therapy doesn't work. It doesn't work. I tried it once. And it's about giving it a fair shot. Like, again, it's going to be multiple visits, and really understanding that this is going to be a bit of a journey. It's not a one-stop shop. And especially if you are someone that piles things into the mental health closet, how can you expect to organize it all in one day? It's just not going to happen. But really, it's about knowing that there are these options out there. And one thing that I do like that you touched on is that obviously it's unfortunate, especially for us. We are in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, and therapy can be extremely expensive, which is unfortunate because I do feel as though it's such an important pillar of our overall health and well-being. And to be honest, we know scientifically there are physical repercussions to poor mental health. However, it's still inaccessible for many people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Upon my research, there's so many resources out there that if you are looking for the help, there's a lot of places that offer therapy on a sliding scale. So just like in your experience when you were in college, where they were like, hey, what can you afford? This is what it is. And it's knowing that that barrier doesn't necessarily have to be an excuse or a reason to not get the help. And when I say get the help, again, I just think it's so important to reiterate. It's not necessarily because you've gotten yourself completely raveled in a situation that you don't know how to deal with. I think that it's through conversations like this that we realize that our mental health isn't something to just look at once in a blue moon.
Mm-hmm.
This is a reason why we are seeing people. I kind of hate the word breakdown in a sense, because I think there is a weakness stigma almost in that. But what can you expect out of a human being if they're carrying everything on their shoulders that sometimes we are asked to carry? It's a lot. And these types of resources go as far as being life-saving. Like, thank God we're talking about it more now. Thank God. And in an essence, talking about it more, not in the fashion that you said, not that many decades ago, where people would be like, oh God, did you hear so-and-so? And a rumor mill is cranking out. Like, I think it's incredible that the reason I want to pursue therapy is because of the positive lived experiences from my circle. That's a stride.
Oh, right. Yeah. Just that the amount that we, even in our Lita's crew, right from the get-go, that we were really kind of open with any kind of mental health struggles or areas that we, it just almost in a weird way, it was something that like bonded us, because we were just really quick to be open about like the kind of mental struggles that we've had. And I don't know if it's maybe a bit because riding a motorcycle is such a form of therapy in so many ways that whenever we're riding, all of a sudden everything kind of comes to the forefront, not because you suddenly start dealing with it all, but because you almost get your first breath from it. And so you almost just feel so I don't know if that has any correlation, or there's like a seed that's kind of planted that you become very vulnerable very quickly, and maybe not. But I think the ease in which I'm able to, I check out the word depression and anxiety openly. And I actually did very early in my life. And the reason I did, even as a teenager, even when I knew it was uncomfortable, or even when I knew that I would maybe be judged by it or looked a certain way by it. And the reason I did was because I thought, if there's anybody else that's feeling this way, I would have given anything to have somebody overhear somebody speak to it this casually, so it didn't feel so alienated by it, sort of thing. I even worked it with in my 20s in group homes for aggressive youth that were dealing with deep mental health. And one of the reasons I did was because I felt so misunderstood and so alienated at times because of it. You wanted to make sure that you were showing up for those teens to say, I see you. I understand that, because it can be so lonely. And now it doesn't feel lonely at all. And not because everyone's just like, oh my God, everyone's very sick. Not like that. But like, misery loves company, nothing like that. But because everybody's going, there's something here, and there's something important to look at. And as a collective, everyone's kind of saying, I'm no longer willing to pretend this is okay, or that this is the way that life should be lived. And at the moment, it looks as though we're all very, very sick, and it's almost just happened. And obviously it is happening at a more devastating rate because of social media, because of, well, obviously with COVID, like, yes, there is things that have, it's a bit on steroids at the moment. But this has always been. It's always been. We're just able to say, what are we going to do about it now? Whereas before it was like, how do we make these people go away? how do you know?
Totally.
And it doesn't mean about like suddenly living a life of perfection where you don't have hardships, or you don't have sadness, or you don't have the emotion of the peaks and valleys. That's not it. That's part of being a human being. And that's a beautiful thing, because the contrast is what allows us to feel the most joy, is, feeling deep, deep sadness. But what it is not getting stuck in the sadness. What it is not getting stuck in the hyper anxiety about what could happen in life, or the what ifs, or it's not being stuck in emotions. It's understanding how to move through them rather than live within one of them.
Yes. And I feel as though therapy will be the path to unlock different levels and a leveled up experience for moving through the seasons of life.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden you're building with these new coping techniques. And I don't know if you ever find, but when you go through the depths, I think you and I have talked about it before, when you're almost stuck in that hole and you can't even see the light or a way out of it. And if you're just clamoring, it's just dirt falling upon your face and you just don't even know how to get out. Those depths can feel so low. But if you've done any element of self-work, you realize every time the well isn't as deep, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's what therapy can help you move through, is understanding that the seasons of life are going to come. They come either in a slow wave, and sometimes they just knock you the fuck out and you don't even know. You're swirling in every direction that you do not know what has happened, how you got there. But the thing is, if we're constantly doing our mental maintenance, those periods of life and those seasons of life are going to be easier to move through. And I say easier to move through in a way. I want to clarify that I'm not going to say those times are going to be easy, because they're not. They're not. That's not the reality of life. Our lived experiences are so hard and deep and emotionally tumultuous. But if we equip ourselves with the tools to just not stay in that washed up wave or that deep well longer than we have to, that's a win. That's a win. And it's these building blocks. That's what I'm excited to build through this as well, because I have used, when you hear therapy, obviously goes with the word therapeutic. And so it's not that I've always ignored my mental health or never processed emotion. I've always leaned on music heavily. And we know music therapy is actually an avenue that exists as well,
Yes.
or through physical exercise and these different tools that we do for ourselves. But I think there's so much power in being able to reach out to another human being that's educated. And even there's so much science that can back up. Like if you look at cognitive behavior therapy, I know they talk about the fact that our habits sometimes are so deep ingrained in us that it's more like a rut. And you don't even know the path to build a new pathway so that we don't continue going in that same cycle of life. That is what this is all about, to be able to make those building blocks. And then we don't end up, as you say, stuck in those emotional periods. We don't end up going down a path of life where we don't realize how it could be possible to get out. I think the roots, it's like having a built-in GPS that realizes faster and faster how to get the correct route versus taking you the long way around. Because when life is hard, the last thing you want to do is take the long way around.
When you go and whether it's, through therapy and then taking that and building it there afterwards, but these coping mechanisms and these tools, when you said about being, the well sort of thing, but it's just not as far down, which I've used a similar analogy in the regards of like all of those coping mechanisms, I still get pushed into that deep, deep hole, the well. But the difference is that I have a rope now and I have grooves kicked into the wall and I can climb out, and I still have to get myself out, but I get out faster. I get out with less damage. I know how to fall easier these times. And I can say that from a point of view where right now I'll get vulnerable in it, that like I am in it. Like I am in like the throes of life right now. We've lost loved ones. And it is this very moment, like I am so deep in life, and I am so deep in sadness and hard stuff, like the real deal hard stuff. But these tools and these experiences that I can look back on, where I was also in difficult times, or I didn't know up from down, and I'm like, grab the rope, put your foot in the hole, and that, whether that is doing this, talking out loud with Chrissy and to whoever's listening, or whether that is going and speaking to somebody, or that's my hot baths with music, or that's a dancing, or that's reading, or like last night, I just fell asleep with my phone on my chest, listening to a playlist. But the difference is that it gives you this crack of light with life, or it just allows you to just see that you're going to be okay, but not just okay, but that, all of this will build you better in life. And if I didn't have that, and I didn't have things like the therapy that I had over the years, I don't think I'd see that crack of light right now. I know I wouldn't see that crack. It would take a long time till I could even see a splinter of light right now. So coming from where it's not a rosy picture right now on my end, that what Chrissy spoke to of it just changes the way you're able to move through life. I'm talking from experiencing in this exact moment of this this recording.
Well, and I love you so much for having this conversation now, because obviously Lori and I have been deeply in touch through all of this, and it makes you just so grateful and full of love for other individuals where they're willing to be that vulnerable with you, and vice versa. What you speak to is why, once again, and I know our very first episode was about the why behind the motivation. And it's drawing on that vulnerability that Lori spoke of earlier that we found within this motorcycle community. It's having conversations with you all, like, maybe you know us personally, maybe you don't, but we see you. And these are the conversations that need to happen. These are the ones that make you realize in those dark times that you aren't alone, that we're collectively moving through our lives. And in so many instances, we get caught in the individuality of that. I have said before where I imagine people walking out the street when I look out my window, and I'll literally visualize them with those bubbles across their head. And just to understand in that moment that that's another human being that's walking through life with their own set of insecurities, worries, celebrations, joys, sadness. We all are collectively having these individual experiences, but as an element of humanity, I use the word collectively because we're moving through this together. And I think there's nothing more important, especially as we're heading into these darker months, regardless of what other layers or seasons of life are upon you right now. It's difficult. We are moving through a difficult space in this timeline of this earth. And I think knowing that there's not an aloneness to it, whatever you're feeling, this is why we have these conversations and why they're so important. Because if it sparks something in you to know that A, you aren't alone, you are not alone, and B, there are so many loving individuals that would wrap you in so many layers of compassion to provide the help when you need the help. You just need to reach out. You just need to reach out. And humanity, I know from my experiences of meeting other humans, taking the steps of exploring this therapy option and how wonderfully received all these first introductions have been, that it's out there. It is out there. And I just, if you see someone struggling, maybe do exactly what this community has done for each other and just open their eyes to that world of possibilities, that there are tools out there to help you move through the seasons and perhaps lift the veil on a fresh perspective.
Amen to that.
Well, I feel as though that might lead us into our motivation
Maintenance.
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 What is your tool du jour?
Well, it was kind of what you spoke to. that I was like,
Love
just
it.
the first step and just kind of research or ask around. Does anybody, friends that you feel comfortable? Does anybody have anybody that they go to that they could refer? The kind of one thing that's come around the bend with COVID is everything's online. So it doesn't necessarily have to be resources just from your community. It could be somebody anywhere kind of in the world. So you can reach out to people that maybe, are similar to you, that really have somebody that they vibe with, because you might vibe with them too. But the kind of thing of like, just take that step, just take the step of looking into who's out there. And if you don't feel comfortable making that phone call. But the other maintenance of it is like, when you step into it, even if you're stepping into it for really big reasons and really specific reasons of needing help, or whether you're just sitting into it for, getting a better expansive, perspective on life, but curiosity as much as possible, because even going through the hard stuff, there's a curiosity about the human experience while you're doing it. Even right now with everything I'm in, I'm still trying to look at it as like the curiosity of like what it means to grieve somebody that you love so deeply. That even in itself, like what a beautiful thing that we as humans can love someone that deeply that it hurts this much. So even the most darkest times, there's a window of curiosity there for you. So curiosity, and just get started somewhere. That's my maintenance.
I love the curiosity. And I think it's because it's something that we practice so much as kids, and we almost lose that inkling within ourselves to just have the insatiable curiosity. So that's very, very good advice. Mine is going to come from the exact place I started this podcast. I was very honest with you. And I said, I'm about to have a conversation about something that almost seems slightly hypocritical because I have not forayed into it myself until these wheels had started turning and I started reaching out and going through my little interview process. And now I have settled on a person. So if you happen to be like myself and have thought about reaching out and starting therapy, and just, if you're like me, master procrastinator, who I'm sure will unlock the reasons why that is as I go on this journey. But write the email, make the call. To be honest, most of them are write the email and just reach out. And I promise you, taking that very first tiny little step, if you've been thinking about doing this for yourself, is going to feel very, very good. And it's very, very safe and approachable. And you're going to have so many options there of somebody that's going to resonate with you, but just quite literally send the email, because you'll feel so wonderful just having taken that first step to making some strides in your own mental health experience.
All right. You ready for that quote?
Sure am.
You want to go?
Sure do. Scrolling. Okay, so this is from psychologist Scott B. Therapy usually has a beginning and an end, but you must practice what you've learned, just like great musicians do, to achieve mastery.
That's wonderful.
We got to do the work.
Do the work. Okay, this is it's Muji. It says, step into the fire of self-discovery. The fire will not burn you. It will only burn what you are not.
Oh,
Ooh.
way better than my quote. I'm so glad. No offense, Dr. B.
Do you know what? I had another quote and then I just reread it. It was from Henry Ford. And I was like, no, I read that wrong the first time. That is not about therapy. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah, I so did.
If there is any secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as your own. Well, that's if you're having conflict with somebody. That has nothing to do with therapy. I was like, nope. And I was like, I'm going to be honest, I'm more saved to the burn which you are not quote for myself. I saved it more for myself because I saved these quotes to reference. And I was like, well, actually, this one's perfect.
You're like, good words, Henry, but not the time. forgot the time or the conversation.
You almost got me, Henry, but not this time, Mr. Ford.
Well, on that note, that is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.